This is Letter from America. Today's topic is the CCC's Mugwazo slogan is scaring ZANU PF dhiziri paChinhoyi. CCC's campaign slogan Mugwazo is resonating with the rural Zimbabweans who form nearly 70% of the country's population. Mugwazo is a cooperative competition to finish ndima or area to be tilled. It mobilizes people into a productive performance without anyone taking unfair advantage over the other. Mugwazo is akin to Jakwara, where people in the community mobilize to help each other. For example, where a woman is a widow and has several children to take care of, people in the community will organize to have a jakwara and spend the day plowing her field. And the woman does not have to feed them. The women from the community will come with food to give to the farmers. At the end of the day, the widow's field is fully tilled, and people celebrate by having a party. That is the spirit and the essence of Mugwazo. In many ways, Mugwazo is a modern narrative of the wind of political change sweeping throughout Africa today. In contrast, ZANU PF campaign slogan, unlike that of CCC, is violence, intimidation, and the lack of accountability, something that goes against the grain of the Zimbabwean indigenous culture. The objective truth is you will gain respect and support from the Zimbabwean masses if you respect the local culture of civility, friendship, cooperative competition, even if you hold different ideas or opinions from each other. But you will not gain respect and support from Zimbabweans if you do as ZANU PF does every day: intimidate people, threaten, kill, rape, abduct, jail political opponents or innocent civilians. This is the spirit of Mugwazo. In many ways, Mugwazo is a modern narrative of the wind of political change sweeping through Africa today. People will vote for candidates who respect indigenous cultural values of peaceful cooperative competition. This scares ZANU PF a lot because this dhiziri paChinhoyi has for many years become separated from the culture of peaceful and friendly competition that the Zimbabwean indigenous culture demands. And now for breaking news. The newly formed opposition party has won the majority seats. The ruling party has won 0 seats in the recent elections. It sounds like CCC and ZANU PF. CCC is a newly formed party. ZANU PF is the ruling party. Therefore, the newly formed opposition party has won the majority seats, right? Well, yes and no, but not quite either. Yet this election result which was announced this week, is making ZANU PF very, very nervous and afraid. Yes, indeed. One can say the Lesotho ruling party was Monzoride in the elections. There is indeed a wind of change blowing across southern Africa. The recently announced results referred to Lesotho. But the same wind of change seems to be blowing in favor of CCC in Zimbabwe. This party, CCC, which was formed in February this year, has won the majority of this year's by-elections throughout the country. ZANU PF can see and uncomfortably feel the trend in electoral politics in Africa. The opposition parties are getting more support from the youths who are dissatisfied with the ruling regimes. Youths throughout Africa are the vast majority of the population. In Zimbabwe, more than 70% of the population is under 20 years of age. The causes of frustration that youths in Lesotho, Zambia, and elsewhere feel are exactly the same as in Zimbabwe. Unemployment is very high, much higher than the figures coming from the government Zimstat, where anyone selling tomatoes, airtime, oranges is considered employed. ZANU PF knows only too well that it stands no chance in hell in winning the majority of the youth's votes in Zimbabwe. For this reason, ZANU PF is resorting to all measures to coerce the citizens to vote for it in the next elections. CCC's Operation Mugwazo, specifically targeting the rural population, is scaring ZANU PF. Mugwazo in the Shona culture means Ndimaya Sara, or the field remaining to be tilled. There is an egalitarian element built into Mugwazo. No one cheats, no one takes unfair advantage of others. Everyone is given an equal chance to finish their assigned Mugwazo. Mugwazo takes place in plain sight. That way, every participant can see how far ahead or behind others they are. Mugwazo is a peaceful cooperative competition. People engaged in Mugwazo exchanged humorous madimikira or jokes. At the end of the day, the winners help the losers to finish their ndima, and everybody goes home as a happy family and happy neighbors. For the rural population, respect for Mugwazo has a cultural appeal. CCC and ZANU PF are behaving differently in their rural campaigns. CCC is very respectful of the people and their local cultures. They tell them what their government will do if they win the elections in 2023. In contrast, ZANU PF is using threatening language. ZANU PF threatens the rural people that they will be arrested if they entertain CCC members or supporters. ZANU PF is unable to answer a simple question. What have you done for Zimbabwe, specifically rural people, in the 42 years you have been in government? Rural life in Zimbabwe today has deteriorated significantly to below the Ian Smith Rhodesia days or years. And the rural people are the ones who will say so publicly. To make it worse, ZANU PF cannot say why it is allowing Chinese mineral prospectors to take over the lands owned by the rural people, and why the rural people are being forced to leave their ancestral lands. To make it worse, rural people are being told to live and fend for themselves. They are not being given a better place to live. The situation in Zimbabwe was described in detail by the Zimbabwe Peace Project. In its report, the Zimbabwe Peace Project stated that the citizens are coerced with the threats of violence for a variety of reasons every day. For example, they are forced to donate for the independence celebrations. The Zimbabwe Peace Project states that most citizens are struggling to make ends meet, and it is against humanity to force them to sacrifice the little they have for the commemorations of national events. The general public are forced to donate monetary and in-kind contributions to the Heroes' Day celebrations in August. The Zimbabwe Peace Project report continues. Threats to withhold government assistance were made to anyone who refused to participate or did so insufficiently. The ZPP documented numerous cases in August where the Zimbabwe Republic Police deliberately infringed on the liberties of citizens. The trend in the last few years and most of this year, August included, is that the ZRP continues to be accused of being responsible for the loss of life of citizens in their custody, in most cases under unclear circumstances. The police seem not to be sensitive to issues relating to disability. The Zimbabwe Peace Project recorded a case on the 20th of August whereby a man with a mental disability was taken to Harare Central Police Station, where he unexpectedly died after being assaulted by the military Presidential Guards unit. This is against Section 219 of the Constitution, which expressly provides their mandate as that of impartiality, patriotism, and of a national character. The Constitution provides for law enforcement agents to act professionally and desist from using force that is disproportionate. In addition, on 21 August, the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission hiked by 1,900% election fees to be paid by presidential and parliamentary candidates seeking to contest in the 2023 elections. Fees for presidential election candidates were hiked to $20,000, up from the $1,000 that was paid in the 2018 elections. The initiative by ZEC is a clear violation of civil and political rights in Zimbabwe. The tragedy of Zimbabweans has also been documented by a social media commentator, Ray Gwisai, who has outlined the trail of failures, broken promises, and acts of violence by ZANU PF since independence in 1980. Gwisai notes that the ZANU PF leadership is now aging. They are getting old, and yet they keep threatening and intimidating citizens with violence. He asks, if the aging ZANU PF keeps frightening people with what they call chimurenga or violence, will they survive if the youths retaliate? ZANU PF sometimes seems to forget that 70% or more of Zimbabwe's population are young people. Gwisai also asks why, since 1980, Zimbabwe has only one radio TV station, while in the region other SADC countries have got multiple and competing radio and TV stations. Why is the country's infrastructure, which was built during the Ian Smith's Rhodesia time, like buildings, roads, passenger train services, in such shambles? There are an infrastructure that was developed and left by Ian Smith. Why do ministers travel in expensive motorcades to officially open garbage bins, boreholes, water taps? Gwisai asks. He also asks what happened to the once flourishing companies like Zisco, Zinasco, Bata, Shabani Mines. They were all doing a roaring business during the Ian Smith time in Rhodesia. What happened to Ziatunga, a reference to Bulawayo during the times the city was bustling with industrial activities more than 42 years ago? Today, Bulawayo looks like a dead city. Gwisai also asks, what happened to the missing billions of dollars from Chiadzwa diamond mining? Mugabe himself said more than $15 billion was unaccounted for from the Chiadzwa diamond mines. Another question, were the victims of the devastating hurricane cyclone Idai ever helped? Were new houses built for them? Were the victims of Operation Murambachina ever compensated? This was a large-scale Zimbabwean government campaign to forcibly clear slum areas across the country. The campaign started in 2005, and according to the United Nations estimates, it affected at least 700,000 people directly through the loss of their homes or livelihoods, and thus could have indirectly affected around 2.4 million Zimbabweans. Were these victims ever compensated at all? The Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission has spent more than $3 million United States dollars. Why is no one in jail for corruption? Gwisai asks. Why are we told someone has been arrested for corruption only to see and learn that that person is free at his or her home? Is this a catch and release game on corruption? And why are Zimbabwe's jails full of human rights activists while the real criminals roam free? The criminals were involved in scandals that included Willowgate, GMB, drugs, and many others, Gwisai asks. Gwisai also asks, the Beitbridge border brings in millions of dollars from customs revenue on goods and other services. According to reports, in 2022, the Beitbridge border earnings amounted to more than 25 million US dollars. So, why is the Zimbabwean side of the border full of slums? Why is it a miserable place to live? The answer is obvious: rampant corruption. Beitbridge border post, the biggest port of entry in sub-Saharan Africa, links Zimbabwe to South Africa, has become a corruption stronghold as travelers bribe their way through to both sides of the border. The border post serves about 10,000 travelers each day, and approximately 4,000 cars pass through the border each day, with the figures soaring to 30,000 travelers and 10,000 cars per day during public holidays. Another question from Gwisai. The Zimbabwe Revenue Authority, or ZIMRA, collects revenue for the government of Zimbabwe. It owns warehouses where confiscated goods are stored until customs or duty for them are paid. Because of corruption, there are reports of missing goods. The question is, why is ZIMRA warehouse burnt down year after year? Gwisai asks that question. Another question. Back in 2000, the late Mugabe authorized the illegal seizure of commercial farms and other lands. ZANU PF sent war veterans to seize the land. This land was distributed among top ZANU PF officials. But reports show that more than 20 years later, these farms are not as productive as they were under their original commercial farm owners. Where is farm productivity from war vets who seized the commercial farms? Gwisai asks. By the way, just a few days ago, it was reported that Zimbabwe has had to import maize from Zambia. Think about that. For many years, Zimbabwe used to be the basket, the bread basket for the region. Another puzzling question is on the exact number of war veterans. The War of Liberation ended more than 42 years ago. In 1997, 50,000 war veterans received compensation for their role in the freedom struggle. Because of age, the war veteran population should be declining because many of them have died. However, in May this year, 2022, the Mnangagwa dhiziri paChinhoyi government announced a compensation to war veterans whose number was 160,000. So let us do the math a bit here. In 1997, there were 50,000 war veterans. Today, 27 years later, there are 160,000 war veterans. This means the number of war veterans for a war that ended 42 years ago has significantly increased. That is another definition of ZANU PF sponsored corruption. Speaking of the history of Zimbabwe as taught in schools, Gwisai asks, is the history of ZIPRA being taught in schools alongside the history of ZANLA? A number of reports have pointed to the fact that the history of ZANLA, the military arm of ZANU, is taught a lot more than or even to the exclusion of ZIPRA, the military arm of ZAPU. In reference to the Gukurahundi massacres, where more than 20,000 civilians in Matabeleland were massacred by the 5th Brigade barely 4 years after the start of independence. Gwisai also asks, what happened to the Dumbuchena report into the causes of Gukurahundi massacres? He also asks whether any of the 5th Brigade soldiers implicated in this massacre were ever tried at all. The Gukurahundi genocide remains the biggest human rights violation by any sitting president in SADC region today. Both the Chihambakwe and Dubuchena reports contain findings of the two commissions of inquiry that were set up to investigate the massacre of 20,000 civilians in Matabeleland and Midlands between 1981 and 1987. Yet, these two reports have never been published, and they have mysteriously disappeared. However, the late ZAPU leader Dumiso Dabengwa said he had seen the reports. He said both reports blamed the 5th Brigade for the massacres. The reports exonerated ZAPU leadership. The reports recommended the prosecution for the soldiers who carried out those massacres. Mugabe and his henchman Mnangagwa suppressed the reports because both Mugabe and Mnangagwa were the masterminds behind the Gukurahundi deployment. It would have meant criminal action against both Mugabe and Mnangagwa. This is why they repressed both reports. In what many saw as another misguided military adventurism, about 11,000 Zimbabwean soldiers were dispatched to the Democratic Republic of Congo on August 2, 1998, to assist the tottering regime of President the late Laurent Kabila to repel an attack by rebels backed by Rwanda and Uganda. This military involvement in DRC cost Zimbabwe more than $5 billion US. But Zimbabweans did not benefit except for the top ZANU PF officials. Yet another question: did ZANU PF keep its promises that it made as the excuse to remove Mugabe? ZANU PF said they were going to get rid of and prosecute what they called the criminal elements around Mugabe. According to ZANU PF, the late Mugabe was removed from office because he was allegedly surrounded by what ZANU PF called criminal elements. ZANU PF promised to prosecute the criminal elements. As of today, none of them has been prosecuted or is in jail. There were other underlying reasons for Mugabe's removal. They included that Mugabe, at 90 years of age, was too old to stay in power. Also, the sacking of Mnangagwa, the rising influence of Grace Mugabe, and tensions that were rising in Zimbabwe amid a deteriorating economy and a vicious struggle to succeed Mugabe. When Zimbabweans joined in the celebrations at the removal of Mugabe on November 21, 2017, they hoped for a new era for the country. They hoped the rule of law, basic human rights, and a new dispensation that reflected the spirit of independence would prevail. Unfortunately for Zimbabweans, their celebrations were premature. When Mugabe took over as president, the situation in Zimbabwe deteriorated rapidly. Today, Zimbabweans are saying Mnangagwa is worse than Mugabe, and both Mnangagwa and Mugabe were worse than Ian Smith. The economic collapse, high inflation, shortage of jobs, and other opportunities, coupled with the repressive environment, has sent thousands of Zimbabweans fleeing to seek asylum in neighboring countries, notably South Africa. Many Zimbabweans who need to leave the country are having a very hard time getting passports. But to get a passport, you must have a birth certificate. If you do not have a birth certificate, getting it is extremely difficult. Gwisai asks, why is trying to get a birth certificate or passport like a criminal offense? He also asks, for how long will Zimbabweans die from crocodiles in Limpopo or xenophobia in South Africa? Perhaps more important, why are Zimbabweans leaving their country? How many Zimbabweans are really leaving the country? The population of Zimbabwe is about 15 million. It has been estimated that possibly up to 1/4 of the Zimbabwean population is outside the country, mostly in South Africa. Recently, the Limpopo Health Dr. Poppy Ramathuba made a controversial comment to a critically injured Zimbabwean woman who was undergoing treatment at a provincial facility. Dr. Ramathuba felt the Zimbabwean government should create better living conditions for its citizens. This is the tragedy of the Zimbabwean narrative. Mnangagwa and ZANU PF have failed to create better living conditions for the Zimbabweans in the country. However, Mnangagwa and ZANU PF have, through corruption, created better living conditions for the ZANU PF elite. Zimbabweans have no faith in the present regime. In the present regime, they will inevitably vote against ZANU PF. And like in previous elections, ZANU PF will simply refuse to give up power, something the ruling parties in Zambia and Lesotho have done after they lost to opposition parties. The big question for Zimbabweans is, what will you do next if your 2023 election is stolen? Will you just sit and wait for the next election in 2018? Or will you take the action that many youths are in other countries through mass protests? Or is it the case that the Zimbabweans who will remove ZANU PF from power are not born yet? Whatever is the case, remember again the following words. Zimbabweans should and must by now have learned the wise words of the former ZANU president, the late Ndabadingi Sithole, that Zimbabweans are their own liberators. Zimbabweans should also take heed of the words of Makomborero Haroziwishe when he said, "We Zimbabweans are many, they ZANU PF are few. We Zimbabweans are the ones we have been waiting for."
This concludes today's broadcast of Letter from America, a weekly in-depth analysis of the situation in Zimbabwe. Thank you for listening. This concludes today's broadcast of Letter from America, a weekly in-depth analysis of the situation in Zimbabwe. Thank you for listening. This concludes today's broadcast of Letter from America, a weekly in-depth analysis of the situation in Zimbabwe. Thank you for listening. This concludes today's broadcast of Letter from America, a weekly in-depth analysis of the situation.